To start off with, we're going to just draw a basic timber frame panel. So there's no window, there's no doors, it's just a solid wall with no openings. So to start off, we always start with the actual panel itself, and we're going to start with the timber stud. Most modern walls now will either have a 150 or a 200 millimeter timber stud. Doesn't really make a difference which we put down. We'd start off with a 200 millimeter stud. So all I'm doing is measuring 20 mil wide, and I'll draw up my construction lines. So there's the start of the panel. Doesn't matter about the height of it, we'll just come along anywhere here and we'll put in a height. So height for the panel. And we'll put a bottom for the panel as well, anywhere down here. Okay, so we have the top and bottom of the panel. Now, normally you're going to be specified the thickness of the panel. We always take the timber to be 50 mil thick. So they might say that the timber stud is 150 mil wide. They might say that the timber stud is 200 millimeter wide. That would mean that the timber is going to be 200 by 50 mil thick. We always take it as being 50 millimeters thick, and that's important when we're drawing out different parts of the timber. Of the timber panel. So I want to put in my head plate. The head plate, again, we'll assume is 50 mil thick. So 50 mil thick for the head plate. Here is my head plate. I'll show an X to show the end grain of the timber. So that would be called a single head plate. If it's going to take a lot of weight, you might need a double head plate. So just two of those timber. Again, I'll step down another 5. And there is my double head plate drawn in. So that's my head plate and my my double head plate drawn in, and I'll draw in the sole plate then as well. Sole plate down the bottom, again same thing, all the timber 50 mil thick, so I'll just step up 5 mil to draw on the sole plate. Leave it in. From the video, there was a layer of plywood on the outside. So we're going to take this as the outside of the building. So plywood 18 millimeters thick, which is about 1.5 mm, 2 millimeters thick. I'll draw a layer of plywood on. So there's my layer of plywood, and outside that I'm going to put on the breather membrane, which was in blue. I'll draw all that in, darken it all in now. I have my timber frame panel, double head plate, sole plate. I've got my plywood on the outside, which we said is 1.5 mm thick, or 2 mil thick, and then I've got my breather membrane, which was the blue on the outside of the panel from the video. So that's the basic panel put in. Insulation would be put in here, in between the studs. I'll come to my outer leaf then. We said you've got a choice of larch cladding or cedar cladding, or else blockwork. We're going to put blockwork on this. The thickness of the cavity doesn't matter, there's nothing going into it. I'm going to make it just a 50 mil cavity, a narrow cavity, and we'll come out 10 millimeters for the blockwork. So the blockwork is always 100 mil thick in real life, so I'll come 10 for the blockwork. So now I've got the position of the external wall. I'll darken that in, and I'll put my symbols on for blockwork. So we've got our 100 millimeter block wall, or block outer leaf. I need to put in wall ties. So anywhere at all we can put in our wall ties, it doesn't matter. They're normally placed every 2 rows high, which would be every 450 millimeters high. They're a different type of wall tie. So the wall tie is built into the blockwork, but it's going to be screwed into the plywood. Now I'll come up here and just show another one anywhere there at all. So that is just showing my wall ties. So that's attaching the inner leaf onto the timber frame. That is the basic panel done. We have to come to the inside of the building now, where we had our airtight membrane, we had our service cavity, and then we had our plasterboard slab on the outside. The airtight membrane doesn't really matter what colour you draw it in. I normally draw it in red, just to make it different from the breather membrane. So our airtight membrane comes up along here. So our two membranes do different jobs. The blue keeps the panel weather tight, so stops wind and rain getting in when you're building it, and it also lets damp air out through the panel. The airtight membrane prevents any air loss from the house. So when you've got your warm house inside, the last thing we want is that warm air going off into the panel through gaps and holes. This is what stops it all. We want to create our service cavity. Service cavities nowadays are about 60 mil thick, so I'm just going to step out 6 mil from the airtight membrane, and I'll draw in the position of the service cavity. So 60 mil wide service cavity, and I'll put on some battens. So the battens are going to be 60 by 60, so I'll come up here and I'll draw my first batten, measure down 6. So the batten drawn in. I can step down again and we'll draw them all in 600 mil apart. So anything to do with timber frame is normally done with 600 millimeter centers. So a gap of 60 mil there between these two battens. Come down again, another 60. And 6 mil thick. And those are my battens drawn in. I'm going to finish off this, and then I'm going to draw in my plasterboard slab, 12 millimeter plasterboard slab. So you're just stepping out about 1 millimeter to draw in the plasterboard slab on the outside, and there it is. So I'll darken all that in, and then we'll talk about the labels. This is the finished drawing. So just to go through the last couple of bits I've put in. So the render on the outside about 1 millimeter thick, just to show the external render outside the blocks. We have PIR insulation inside in the timber frame panel, so I've shown that in yellow. And then we've got our labels. So we've got our 250 by 50 millimeter head plate. We've got our 200 by 50 millimeter vertical timber studs, 12 millimeter plasterboard. We've got our airtight membrane in red, 60 by 60 millimeter timber batten. Our service cavity, so this is the gap where all the cables and pipes run through. We've got our PIR insulation, so a rigid insulation, 18 millimeter plywood outside the panel, and then we've got our breather membrane in blue. Last one's in, we've got our wall tie to attach the wall onto the timber frame. We've got our render, and we've got our block outer leaf. That is our basic panel complete.